we have today, I guess you know this, that the nuclear tensions, well, people say it's actually higher than ever. Would you agree with that? That because you just explained your experience with being in the military at the time. You have seen all these little intricate things that the Soviets were doing to prevent like a hair trigger to start a nuclear war. Now, here we are again today. Kynan and I are only in our early 20s. Do you think that today is just as bad or worse, or maybe not as bad as what you had just described?
Well, let me say a couple of things. The level of tension is not nearly as high as it was back then. The level of danger, the risk of nuclear war, is vastly greater than it was. So what's going on back then, as it turns out, the U.S. was so overwhelmingly dominant in nuclear power that the actual risk was not very great. We thought it was, but it turns out historically it was not. But we were, I was born in the final year of World War II, and so I grew up where the adults had all experienced Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and they, it was a shock to people. My gosh, they've just, vaporized two major cities, and they've killed everybody, every human being. I mean, some of them survived, but a lot of them didn't. And so in terms of tension, it was very tense because it was very real to people. Today, the great danger is that it's not tense. It's casual. It's like some movie type of thing. It's something that's not real, that doesn't really happen. It can't occur. And this is why we're seeing these insanely reckless acts. It appears, nobody has made an admission, but it appears that the United States and Great Britain conspired and coordinated to sabotage and destroy the Nord Stream 1 and Nord Stream 2 pipelines that carry gas, natural gas, from Russia into Germany. It is literally the lifeblood of the beating heart of Europe. And there were two massive undersea blasts at deep depths that caused major damage and knocked out both of these two completely distinct pipelines. So it was coordinated. It was done almost simultaneously in considerably different locations. And apparently a text from the Prime Minister of Great Britain, Liz Truss, was intercepted, and the text simply said, "It's done." And this occurred 1 minute after the blasts that the Prime Minister said, "It's done." And obviously, the recipient, who was Tony Blinken, knew what was being done because he didn't have to be told what was being done. So he knew what was being done, and she was saying that it has been done. And I think what it was the pipelines had been destroyed, that it was done by special operators from the United Kingdom, or at least coordinated by the United Kingdom. And it was being reported back to Washington that the deed had been accomplished. Now, this is an act of war. When you destroy a major industrial feature that you don't own it. Russia owned it and Germany owned it, and so the things that we're doing today are outrageously provocative. If you look back to the way that the First World War started, you had the Archduke Ferdinand of Austro-Hungary, and he and his wife were riding in some procession. They were gunned down by an assassin. You had two people who were killed, and that began this wave of interlocking treaties being triggered. And all of a sudden, this country would say, well, we've got to back Austro-Hungary. And another country would say, well, we've got to back this other one. And before long, you had these great factions. Minimum of 14 million people were killed as a way of getting even for the death of two people. The First World War almost certainly led directly to the Second World War, which came not that long afterwards, and a minimum of 50 million people were killed. So you can track all of these tremendous numbers of deaths back to this initial incident where two people were killed, and then everybody said, well, we can't let them get away with this. We got to get even. And well, they did, and they killed literally generations of people in the war. Now, the tensions were not nearly so great in Sarajevo when those assassinations took place. Today, the military tensions between NATO and the Russian Federation are just off the chart. And now there's not this, in the West, there's this feeling, this sort of casual feeling about the nuclear aspects of it. But the other aspects are tremendous. Apparently, there have been a couple of thousand Polish soldiers who've been infiltrated into Ukraine to fight against the Russians, and a couple thousand who have been killed of the ones who were sent from Poland. So you actually have NATO troops on the ground in Ukraine fighting against Russia. And there's this constant escalation, this movement to some higher level. And at the same time, lurking in the background behind it all is the risk that something will happen and someone will not be cool-headed, and they'll say, we're going to get even, I'm going to do this, or I'm going to do that. I worry that the NATO countries at some point will stage a provocation to create a pretext to go to war directly against Russia. There's a lot of loose talk on the part of the West about the use of nuclear weapons. There was a Republican senator, I believe it was Weicker, who commented that he doesn't take anything off the table, including a first nuclear strike. Now, first nuclear strike would be the U.S. launching a nuclear Pearl Harbor and a surprise attack on Russia. Now, later on, the senator's office came out and said, well, we didn't mean to suggest that we were going to do it. It's just American policy never to take anything off the table. The problem is that he had put it on the table. It wasn't a matter of not taking away any threat or any option. He was literally talking about it. And when you talk about nuclear things, words have great meaning. So we stand at a juncture in history where this war is swirling around. Hopefully, it will end in a way that will bring this massive bloodshed to an end without something happening that triggers a nuclear confrontation. But we are at great risk. And someone the other day, I heard some commentator say, well, so-and-so said there wasn't more than a 10 or 20% chance of an outbreak of nuclear war. Well, you're talking about in a modern nuclear war where at any given moment, both the United States and Russia have about 1,250 nuclear weapons ready to fire. Each side has a total of something like 5,000 or 6,000 nuclear weapons, but there are about that number that are ready at any instant. If we have an exchange of that sort, it is very likely that a major part of all of human life on Earth will be destroyed. Civilization, as we know it, will be destroyed. You have people who are so hyper about the climate and wondering, what would happen if the global temperature rose by 2 degrees by the year 2100. I would ask them, well, how would you like the temperature in your city to rise by 2 million degrees in a tenth of a second? I don't think they worry about it. They worry more about the distant possibility of a couple of degrees temperature change. We should be very concerned about it because even if it's a 10 or 20% chance, that's playing Russian roulette. Okay, you 20%. You're talking about what if you've got 5 cylinders? Does that give you? I think that gives you 20% chance. Would you want to put a pistol to your head and spin the cylinder and pull the trigger? Not if you're a rational human being, you don't. But that's what we're talking about. We're talking about Russian roulette with a 10 or 20% chance, and we really the only way that we can safely avoid that is to pull back and to establish Ukraine, the nation of Ukraine, as a nuclear-free buffer state that is not part of an alliance on the east or an alliance on the west, but is totally free of foreign armaments and free of foreign soldiers anywhere on its soil. They need to bake that into their constitution, all of their legal documents, and then the West and the Russian Federation need to both agree to be guarantors of this neutrality and this non-belligerence on the part of Ukraine. This was done in 1955 during the Cold War with Austria. Somehow all the parties, all of the occupying parties in Europe, the post-war occupying parties, they agreed they would all withdraw from the nation of Austria. It would not be part of the Cold War. It would not be part of the Iron Curtain. And in exchange, Austria changed its constitution. They said, we will forever be non-aligned and we will forever prohibit the stationing of foreign troops on our soil. And a lot of that lingers to this day in Austria. I went during the height of the Cold War when things were just incredibly tense and you didn't dare to make a slip. And I drove with my family across the border into Austria. It's around Christmas time. It was the happiest, most joyous country you've ever seen. People were they were celebrating Christmas. Uh, they were free to practice their religion. They were free to speak openly. People were partying. They were cheerful. But you go anywhere else on the Iron Curtain, people were tense. They were, they were armed to the teeth on both sides. Occasionally, someone would be killed accidentally by one side or the other. And Austria just, they became very prosperous and happy. This can happen to Ukraine. They can be a prosperous, happy country, free from foreign influences. And I think that's the direction we need to take. We need to get them out of the Cold War that's developed and provide them as a buffer of safety, not only a buffer to Russia, but also a buffer to the West. As it is now, as NATO closes in on the Russian border, if there is some inadvertent firing of a missile, the Russians are in the position where they don't have time to analyze, to deliberate, and to react. All they can do is react. And then they are compelled to do an all-out attack on the United States and on Europe. And it's a great tragedy. We should never have moved NATO to the east at the end of the Cold War. At that time, we had 1,000 miles separating the German border from the border of Russia. And had we preserved that, it was a historic opportunity to diminish the threat of nuclear war, because you'd have that buffer to where if something inadvertent happened, there could be communications, there was time to deliberate, to react. And today, the chances of an inadvertent nuclear exchange have gone up 1,000-fold because we have reduced the deliberation time almost to zero. We can reverse that, and I think we should through a peace with Ukraine that takes them completely out of any possibility of a NATO alliance.